Steam was still rising from the bowl of soup when my son threw it straight into my face. The scalding liquid ran down my neck, shards of porcelain cut my lip, and he roared, "Useless! If you weren't my mother, you'd be thrown out of this house already." I stood still, wiped the blood at the corner of my mouth, and heard my daughter-in-law giggle. "You're such a real man, know how to teach the elderly the right way." For 3 years, I swallowed my tears, every insult, every slap, every dollar of my pension managed for me because I believed a mother's love could pull a son back from the edge. But that faith shattered when someone from his company called, asking about unusual transfers under my name. Right after, Andrew said coldly, "Tomorrow you'll sign everything. If not, you'll be the money launderer." That night, I dried the blood, opened the drawer, and picked up my phone. Every statement, every audio clip I'd quietly gathered for months would no longer be evidence I was afraid to hide, but the indictment I intended for the son who used to be my only pride. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I am Margaret Hill, 68, widowed for nearly 10 years. I used to be an executive secretary at Benton and Avery LLP, where I spent over 40 years keeping every contract and every meeting on the dot. My life was tied to numbers, punctuation marks, and the belief that if I worked hard enough, life would be fair. This house, a small 2-story place in the western suburbs of Chicago, is the only reward I kept after a lifetime of work. But now, I live in it like an unnamed housekeeper. The morning after the bland soup night, I woke in the gray light leaking through the curtains. My neck burned, my lip was split, and every movement sent a stab through my left shoulder. In the mirror, my face was slightly swollen, the red streak on my neck spreading purple. I dabbed on a little cheap foundation, listening to Andrew's footsteps echo downstairs. When I came to the kitchen, Andrew was already at the table. The light flashed off his red tie, the only familiar thing left of the boy who once wore a cheap suit to his first interview. Now he didn't look at me like a son looks at his mother, but like a boss looks at a lowly employee. "Where's breakfast?" he snapped, eyes never leaving his phone. "What would you like?" I asked softly. "Scrambled eggs, toast, black coffee. Don't overcook the eggs." I stayed quiet and did as told. As I stood at the stove, soft footsteps sounded. Jasmine, Andrew's wife, in a mint silk nightgown, brown hair pulled into a neat high ponytail. Her smile was sweet and proper, the kind meant for a husband, not a mother-in-law. "Good morning, Mother Hill," she said, voice light as air. I nodded. "Morning." Her eyes landed on the bruise at my neck, then flicked to her husband as if to ask, "Too rough last night?" Andrew just curled his lip and sipped coffee. Jasmine smiled and turned back to me. "You should be more careful. The kitchen floor is very slippery." I heard the message under her words, but said nothing. I poured coffee into a cup and set it gently in front of Andrew. He didn't say thank you, only murmured low enough for me to hear, "Remember, if anyone asks, you fell. And stop making random phone calls." I lowered my head. Jasmine gave a tiny laugh, straightened his tie, and said teasingly, "You really are the man of the house. Without you, this place would be chaos." Andrew put a hand on her waist, kissed her forehead, then shot me a cold smile. When the two of them left and the engine started outside, I finally exhaled. I washed the dishes slowly, keeping my mind blank. Every time I bent over, my shoulder stabbed with pain. This kitchen, where I once baked with my husband for Thanksgiving, where I hung Andrew's Christmas cards when he was little, felt like a strange room now. I'd lived here more than 30 years, but since Andrew moved, back in. Nothing in this house belonged to me anymore. 3 years ago, when Andrew divorced, he knocked on my door in the middle of a rainy night. "Just staying for a bit, Mom," he said. "I've lost everything." I pitied him and opened my door and my wallet. I didn't know that opening my door to my son meant opening the door to my own hell. At first, things seemed fine. Andrew fixed the fence, took me grocery shopping, said sweet things like when he'd been a good boy. Then he started managing my pension. "Let me handle it," he said. "Older folks get scammed so easily." From then on, I was left $20 a week for spending. The rest Andrew invested for me. I didn't ask because I trusted my son. When Andrew married Jasmine, I already had doubts. The wedding was oddly extravagant: white flowers, a live string quartet, imported champagne far beyond Andrew's reach. When I asked, he said, "The company sponsored it, don't worry." I believed him, until I found the payment receipts drafted from an account under my name. From then on, Jasmine treated me like hired help. I cooked, washed, and cleaned. She showed sweetness only when guests were around. Otherwise, she was ice cold. "At every meal," she told her husband, "having a mother-in-law like this is as convenient as having a housekeeper for free." Andrew just laughed. I couldn't. The violence started with criticism: too salty, too bland, too cold. Then pounding the table, then slaps, shoves, pinching, hands on my throat. I once thought if I stayed quiet, he'd calm down. The quieter I was, the worse it got. That bland soup night was only the final result of 3 long years of silence. The next morning, just as I was about to make tea, the landline rang. A polite male voice said, "Hello, I'm Owen Price, an accountant at Northern Apex. I need to confirm some recent transactions from an account under the name Margaret Hill." I froze, hand shaking. "My account?" "Yes. There are repeated transfers totaling nearly $50,000 signed under your name, but the signature appears inconsistent." I glanced at Andrew's door shut tight. "We'll check." "Thank you," Owen said. "If needed, you can meet me in person on the 18th floor at Northern Apex, 1134 North Avenue. The sooner the better." When he hung up, I stood there, still holding the cup of tea grown cold. On the table was the black envelope I'd kept hidden. Inside were statements I'd secretly printed when Andrew wasn't looking. Now I understood. He'd used my name to launder money. The front door swung open. Andrew stepped in, voice flat. "Someone call?" "No, just an ad." I lied. He stared straight into my eyes, like he could see through me. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The bank, you sign for everything. Otherwise, the money laundering charge is yours." I didn't answer. In my head, his sentence kept echoing. "Otherwise, you'll be the money launderer." That night, I opened the safe, took the black envelope and my phone, and hid them in my cardigan pocket. Every document, every recording, every tiny detail I'd gathered for months now, they finally mattered. As I sat at the table, my neighbor Ruth Delgado knocked. She's a kind woman, 66, with softly curled gray hair, who often brings me baked goods on weekends. "Oh my, Margaret," she whispered, seeing my split lip. "What happened?" "I fell," I said, turning my face away. Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder and murmured, "If you need me, knock 3 times on the back door. I'll be there." After she left, I sat in silence. The house was still. Only the ticking clock and a draft slipping through the door crack. I wrote a few small lines on a piece of paper. "I'll cook tomorrow's lunch, but the bank, I'll talk to your accountant." I set the note on the table beside 6 crumpled $10 bills. Andrew, I had tossed down. Then I walked through the living room and looked at an old photo: Andrew at 8, grinning on the lawn. I touched the frame, my voice trembling. "You were once my pride, but tomorrow I won't let you destroy me any further." Outside, the night wind hissed through the dried rose canes under the eaves. I drew the curtains, turned off the light, and sat in the dark. No more fear, only one thought. Tomorrow I will push back. 3 years ago, on a cold, rainy night, a knock came while I was making tea. When I opened the door, Andrew stood there, soaked, stubbled, pulling a gray suitcase. The porch light cast his face in yellow. Tired. Bitter. A little pitiful. Like when he was small. "I lost everything, Mom," he said hoarsely. "Divorce, debt. The bank took the house. Can I stay for a while?" I didn't think twice. I opened the door, pulled the suitcase in, and opened my heart too. "This is always your home," I said. The words came as naturally as breathing because no matter her age, a mother only knows how to open her arms when her child falls. The first weeks were peaceful. Andrew slept in his old room upstairs, still calling me Mom, in a gentle tone. I got up early to brew coffee and toast bread. He fixed the pipes and painted the fence. In the evenings we watched the news. I listened to him talk about work and stress. He said he would start over. I believed every word. Then, one morning, while I was slicing apples, he looked around the table and said casually, "Mom, the house is kind of messy. After years alone, I guess you got used to clutter?" I forced a smile. "I keep things tidy." Andrew shrugged. "Sure, you're kind of tidy. Men like a different kind of clean." I went quiet. It was the first hint of criticism in his voice. Just a hairline crack, but I didn't know it would spread like rot under the floor. A few weeks later, Andrew suggested, "Let me help manage your finances. You still get about $1,300 a month in pension, right?" I hesitated. "That's my daily living money." "Don't worry. I'll give you spending cash about $20 a week. Enough. I just want to be sure no one takes advantage of you." Hearing "take advantage" made my throat tighten. Ironically, I was letting myself be taken advantage of and didn't know it. I agreed. The next day, Andrew brought home a new account form and told me to sign. "Sign here. Your old signature is too easy to fake. I'll register a new signature for security." I signed. One shaky stroke, and with it, I signed away my freedom. In the months after, Andrew changed. He spoke less, snapped more, and often said, "You don't understand the world now." I had to cook his favorites at exact times, exact flavors. If it was too salty, he put his chopsticks down and left the table. I ate the rest in silence. Then Jasmine appeared, a long-haired brunette with red lips and a confident gaze. Andrew introduced her on a Saturday afternoon while I was watering plants. "Mom, this is Jasmine. The best woman I've ever met." I shook her hand, felt her dark red nails, cold as ice. She smiled. "I hear you're very organized. I like women like that." Neat and orderly. Polite words, but it felt like she was inspecting a valuable antique. Their wedding came just 2 months later, at a lavish country club. Everything was so extravagant it stunned me. Live music, French wine, a jeweled silk gown, a buffet so grand I felt out of place. I whispered to Andrew, "Where did you get the money for all this?" He put a hand on my shoulder and smiled. "Don't worry, someone sponsored it." But when I got home and checked the account, the balance was cut in half. The numbers vanished coldly, without explanation. I knew but didn't dare speak. Once he had Jasmine, my questions were cut off by a stare sharp as steel. After the wedding, Jasmine moved in. I thought, another woman in the house might calm Andrew down. I was wrong. From day one, she circled the rooms, issuing orders. The living room's a bit dark. "Mother Hill, mind if I change the curtains?" "And the old sofa has to go. I'll get a modern one." Softly, I said, "Your father-in-law and I picked that set when we married. It's still good." She smiled. "I understand, but every generation has different taste. I'll handle it." Within 2 weeks, the home I loved became somewhere else. Cold white curtains, gray walls, an oversized dining table. Their wedding photos went up, ours disappeared. In one morning of clearing out old things, Jasmine erased 40 years of my memories. She called me Mom when guests were around. When it was just us, she switched to you in a clipped, dismissive way. "Did you mop yet?" "Change the guest room sheets, my friends are coming tomorrow." Stick to light chores, you're old. Oh, and don't forget the trash before I'm back. I listened, obeyed, and slowly forgot what it felt like to be called Margaret. Andrew was no longer the son I knew. Always in a suit, home late, talking to me only when something needed handling. One evening he handed me an envelope. Sign here, new bank card. The old one has issues. I skimmed it, saw faint words. Full authorization. You need that much control? Don't make this hard. I'm trying to help. His voice was calm. His eyes were a warning. I signed. From then on, I didn't know how much money I had. All bank mail went to Andrew's email. If I asked, he said, everything's fine, just cook and rest. When I salted a stew a little too much, Andrew slammed the table. Do you know how to do anything right? Jasmine giggled, leaning on his shoulder. Don't be mad, she's just cooking by habit. That was the first time Andrew slapped me. Quick, clean, like a reflex. I stood frozen, ladle in hand. My cheek burned, but what hurt most was that no one thought it was unusual. Jasmine just murmured, "Stop, don't leave a mark on her hand." After that, each week brought a new excuse. Cold rice, dirty bowls, a damp dishcloth. Andrew started shoving me when he was angry, squeezing my shoulders, pinching my arms, slapping me if I dropped a glass. I learned to move quietly, step softly, speak less. I didn't dare meet my son's eyes. Every night after they slept, I sat at the kitchen table, opened my old computer, and secretly printed bank statements I found in an old inbox. I hid them in a black envelope inside the safe. Each page tightened my chest but also gave me a tiny bit of power. Andrew controlled my phone, too. He installed a location app, saying it was so you won't get lost. Every time I called someone, he asked, "Who's that?" Sometimes he checked my call log. Old friends stopped reaching out. I became invisible in my own life. Once, my closest friend at the firm, Marjorie, invited me to lunch. Before I could answer, Andrew snatched the phone. "You're not going anywhere. They just want your money." I went silent. Marjorie never called again. Days blurred together. Cook in the morning, laundry, mop the floors, then cook again at night. I turned into a useful shadow, no breaks, no mistakes allowed, no voice. Sometimes I opened the drawer with my old blue dress, the one my husband said made me look like spring. I touched it and remembered when Andrew was a boy running through the yard shouting, "Mom, look at me." I used to think raising a child was duty. Now I know sometimes it's a gamble with your soul. One night, I sat on the porch, looking at the light in my neighbor Ruth Delgado's window. She keeps a lamp on late, reading by the glass. I wondered if she'd hear me if I knocked. I didn't dare. Not yet, I was still too weak. Even so, a small thought formed inside me, frail but determined, like a seed pushing through dry soil. One day, I will get out. And on the bland soup night, when the hot steam ran down my neck, I knew that day had come. The next morning, I stood in the small kitchen staring at 6 crumpled $10 bills. $60, the money Andrew tossed down like charity, was my entire budget to make a perfect lunch for Jasmine's friends. I opened the fridge, half a stick of butter, 3 eggs, wilted greens, a third of a bottle of white wine. I took a breath and pushed the humiliation aside. I'd hosted firm luncheons for tougher guests. The only difference was back then I was Mrs. Hill. Now I was just the cook. I wrote a list and counted every dollar. Frozen salmon, romaine, pasta, lemons, a few slices of baguette and a bit of cream for dessert. Total, $57. $3 left, just enough for a small bouquet to keep the table from looking bare. While I folded the last bill carefully, Andrew came in white shirt, silver gray tie, coffee in hand. He glanced over the ingredients and snorted. "Don't embarrass me. Jasmine's friends all have husbands in big positions. Make sure it suits their taste and don't talk too much." I nodded in silence. "Oh," he added, "and don't let anyone ask about that bruise. If they do, say you slipped carrying the soup." Jasmine swept in white dress, hair neatly coiled. She smiled like candy. "Mother Hill, I want everything to be truly refined. I planned this to make an impression. Andrew says you cook wonderfully. I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do sounded like a dare. I cooked all morning." Steam fogged the glass. Oil stung my neck, but I kept stirring the sauce. Butter and garlic filled the air. By 12:30 p.m., the table was set. Seared salmon, Caesar salad, pasta with lemon cream sauce, chocolate mousse, and the white wine I'd saved from my husband's birthday years ago. The bell rang. 3 women came in, perfume mixing with the scent of rain on their coats. Jasmine introduced them. "This is Becca, Lydia, and Noelle." All 3 were elegant, soft-spoken, heels tapping on the floor. Becca had the sharp gaze of someone always comparing. Lydia laughed easily, voice bright. Noelle, the quietest, wore a gentle smile but watched everything closely. They sat around the table. Jasmine poured wine and giggled. "I cooked all of this myself." "Well, with a little help from my mother-in-law." Lydia burst out laughing. "Oh my gosh, having a mother-in-law like this must be so convenient. No need to hire help." Jasmine pretended to blush. "Pretty much. She loves to cook." I pressed my lips together, gripping the dish towel as heat rose in my chest. I held it in. I'd heard enough jokes like that to last a lifetime. I carried out the salmon and said quietly, "Please enjoy." Noelle looked up. Her smile faded when she noticed the faint tear at my lip. "Are you hurt, Mrs. Hill?" Before I could answer, Jasmine cut in lightly. "She slipped last night. She's clumsy." Becca laughed. "Just like my mom. Older people can be so awkward." Their laughter circled the table, and the room seemed to shrink. Noelle kept her eyes on me, no longer carefree. "Where did you work before?" she asked. I lifted my head and said softly, 40 years at Benton and Avery LLP, before I retired." The table fell silent. Lydia set down her fork. Becca narrowed her eyes, surprised. Jasmine forced a smile. She was just a secretary, but very dedicated, probably why she types super fast. Noelle tilted her head. "Benton and Avery? I know that firm. I worked with them on a big case in 2010. She looked at me differently, like she'd recognized something. "You're Margaret Hill, aren't you? I remember seeing your name on the exec list for Hanover v. State." I froze. That case name was a ghost I'd tried to forget. I nodded, voice tight. "Yes, that's me." Noelle gave a small smile, not pity, but a quiet respect I hadn't seen in anyone's eyes for 3 years. The mood changed. Lydia switched topics, Becca sipped wine, and Jasmine kept a stiff smile, flicking anxious glances at me as if afraid I'd say more. I just cleared plates and listened to the silver on china clink, each sound slicing at my chest. Around 2 p.m., Andrew came home. The door opened and leather shoes hit the floor. "Babe," Jasmine squealed, running to him, arms around his neck like a war reunion. Andrew smiled and came to the table. Seeing me at the sink, he set a hand on my shoulder, light, but enough to freeze me. "See, ladies?" he joked. "My mother's the best chef in Chicago. If I didn't keep her here, some restaurant would have hired her." His friends laughed, thinking it was a compliment. Only I knew that squeeze wasn't affection. It was a warning. Lunch ended in polite pretense. When the guests left, Noelle lingered and said softly, "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Hill. If there's a chance, I'd love to hear more about your time at Benton and Avery." I kept my voice steady. "I'd like that." Her look told me something without words, a quiet solidarity. The door closed. The house went still. Jasmine turned to Andrew, voice sharp. "See, your mother was bragging about the past again." I told her to keep quiet. Andrew looked at me, half smiling, half annoyed. "Mom, don't bring up old stories next time. No one wants to hear them." I nodded. "I understand." Jasmine grabbed her bag and pecked his cheek. I'm off to the salon. Make sure the dishes are done, Mother Hill. She said it on her way out, light as a breeze, but I got the message. I cleared the table. One plate was broken. I picked up each shard. Steam from the sink burned my eyes. In my head, Noelle's words kept echoing. I remember seeing your name. A small touch that brought a weak heartbeat back to life. Someone still remembered who I had been. In the afternoon, I descant of that, brought leftovers to Ruth Delgado. As the door opened, she looked at me, worried. "Oh, Margaret, your lip hasn't healed yet?" "I'm fine," I said softly. "Their lunch is done." She shook her head, took the container, then, pretending to speak loudly, "Thank you. I'll wash the container and bring it back." Her voice was louder than usual, enough that if Andrew was home, he'd hear it clearly. That evening, just as I sat down on the sofa, there was a knock at the door. It was Ruth, standing there with the food container scrubbed spotless. "Thank you," I said, about to close the door. Ruth leaned in slightly, lowered her voice. "Are you okay?" The question was light as a breeze, but my heart clenched. I wanted to nod, to say I'm okay, but my throat tightened. "I'm okay," I whispered, and my eyes began to blur. Ruth looked deep into my eyes and didn't say anything else. She gently placed the container in my hands along with a small quarter-folded note. "Keep this," she said. "If you need me, knock 3 times on the back door at 7 o'clock. I held the note, feeling the warmth of her hand still lingering. After Ruth left, I opened it. The rounded, firm handwriting read, "I believe you, and I have ears to listen." I sat quietly for a long time. Outside on the porch, the evening wind carried the damp smell of soil and roses. Inside, the house was as still as always, but somewhere in that silence I heard a familiar beat, my own, a beat no longer afraid, starting to wake up. I got up at 5 a.m. Pale dawn slid through the curtains and across the wooden floor where I'd been writing all night. Next to a cold cup of tea was a thick black envelope, the thing I'd been carrying like a lucky charm. I put on my old wool coat, slipped into my worn flats, grabbed my purse, and opened the door softly as if I might wake the past. Andrew was still asleep. I heard a light snore upstairs, and Jasmine had left early to go to yoga. This was my only chance. I hurried across the yard. The morning chill pricked my skin like needles. I caught the number 24 bus toward downtown and took a window seat. The city was still misty, gray buildings sliding by, and my heart felt as heavy as if I were carrying my whole life in my coat pocket. The trip was longer than I expected. I hadn't been back to the business district where I used to work in 7 years. When the bus stopped near the Northern Apex building, I looked up at the huge glass wall reflecting the first light of day, a new headquarters, 18 floors, gleaming as if it had never held anything dirty. I took a deep breath and stepped through the revolving door. The receptionist looked at me with polite, assessing eyes. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I have an appointment with Mr. Owen Price." "Your name, please?" "Margaret Hill." She tapped a few keys and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Price is waiting on the 18th floor. Elevators to your right." In the elevator, I watched the numbers climb. From 1 to 18 steps between a mother and the truth I was about to face. When the doors opened, a salt and pepper-haired man approached. He was in his early 50s, trim, gray suit, thin glasses. "Mrs. Hill? I'm Owen Price. Thank you for coming." His voice was low, warm, and without judgment. We walked into a small conference room with glass walls. He set a thick folder in front of me. "I'll be direct," he began. "We found a pattern of suspicious transactions tied to an account in your name more than $50,000 over the past 6 months. The funds were moved out immediately after they came in, mostly to accounts in Miami and Denver. All of them bear your signature, but the handwriting doesn't match." It felt like the floor dropped out beneath me. "What are you saying?" Owen slid the papers toward me. "These are copies. As you can see, there are clear..." Inconsistencies in the signature. The person doing this is your son, Andrew Hill. I stared at the page. Every number, every comma cut like a knife. My name, Margaret Hill, repeated again and again, a name I once felt proud of, now a tool in a scam. You're saying my son used my account to launder money? Owen nodded slowly. More precisely, he used your identity to legitimize embezzled funds from the company. We've collected sufficient financial evidence. Management wants to handle it internally for now, but you need to know so you can protect yourself. If law enforcement gets involved, you'll be the first one named. I dropped the pen, my hands shaking. I don't know anything. I didn't sign, I didn't transfer. I just live in my house. I believe you, Owen said, eyes sincere. But the law won't accept words alone. I advise you to file a report immediately. That will protect you as someone exploited, not an accomplice. I sat in silence. In my head echoed my late husband's voice from long ago. Margaret, when everyone turns away, the truth is the only thing that stands with you. I swallowed and asked softly, if I sign, what happens to Andrew? He'll be formally investigated, but you can't save him by staying silent. Silence is admitting guilt in your place. I looked at him, sunlight from the glass wall reflecting in my eyes. Give me the form. Owen took out another packet and set a pen down. My hand shook, but the letters were clear. Margaret L. Hill. When I finished, I took a deep breath. You did the right thing, Owen said gently. And no matter the outcome, you're the most honorable person in this story. I stood. My legs felt unsteady, but I was lighter somehow. I wasn't just a victim anymore, I'd taken action. When I stepped out of the building, the midday light hit my face and made me squint. It had been years since the sun didn't feel cold. I caught the bus back. The ride felt endless. I thought of Andrew, the boy who once slumped on my shoulder after failing a college exam, who said, "I'll make you proud." Now he'd turned me into a shield for his sins. I didn't know if there was anything left between us to call mother and son. When I got home, the clock was striking close to 3. I had barely stepped inside when I heard Andrew from the living room. "Where did you go?" His voice was dry and low, but I recognized what sat underneath: suspicion. "I went out for a bit," I said slowly, hanging my coat on a chair. "Out where?" "To see your accountant." The air froze. Andrew shot to his feet, his face changing color. "What?" I spoke with Owen Price. He showed me everything: the transactions, the forged signatures, the accounts in Miami. I know it all. For a few seconds he couldn't speak. Then his wide hand clamped down on my wrist, squeezing till the joints crackled. "Are you joking, Mother?" "I've never joked about justice." He squeezed harder, his breath hot on my face. "Shut up, you senile old woman. You have no idea what you're destroying." Pain shot through my arm. "Andrew, let go." He gritted his teeth, voice dropping. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. You're going to the bank to sign everything away, understood?" I looked him straight in the eye, no fear left. "No." He shoved me. I stumbled into the table, pain shooting up my arm. "No? You think you can go against me?" "Not against you, Andrew. Against the law," I screamed. The sound burst out louder than I expected. "Which detail outraged you most? The bruising wrist grab or the senile old woman accusation?" You can share it quickly in the comments. I'll read every note because your words might be the lifeline for someone scared and hiding somewhere out there. Outside, I saw a figure by the fence, Ruth Delgado. She stopped, eyes wide. He let go of me and glanced toward the window. My eyes met. Ruth's for an instant, and I knew she had heard. Andrew stepped back, his face tight. He inhaled, then gave a thin smile, the kind that chilled me. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the bank. You will sign. If not, don't blame me." He turned and went upstairs. I dropped into a chair, hands still shaking. Purple fingerprints were already forming on my wrist. A coffee mug lay shattered on the table, liquid spreading across the floor. I saw my reflection in it, a gray-haired woman with tired eyes, but no longer weak. I heard Ruth's window slide open. A breeze drifted in carrying a hint of cinnamon from her baking. Then a small tapping, 3 knocks, slow and sure. I lifted my head and gave a slight nod. That night, I sat by the window in the dark. Moonlight fell on the black envelope, lighting up the cold words like fate's proof. I knew the real fight would start tomorrow, but I also knew something else. This time, I wouldn't be alone. I couldn't sleep that night. The clock ticked in the dark house like the heartbeat of someone counting down to something inevitable. On the table, the black envelope lay thick and silent, but alive like a second heart in my chest. Close to midnight, a faint light flickered in the backyard and startled me. I lifted the curtain. Ruth Delgado was crouched by the rose bed. Moonlight lay across her shoulders like mist. She set something down and covered it with dry leaves. When the flashlight clicked off, I realized it was a mini camera. I cracked the door and whispered, "Ruth?" She raised a hand for silence, then murmured, "He'll blow up again, Margaret. You need proof. Don't be afraid." I nodded, heart pounding. Ruth disappeared into the dark. The scent of roses that night, earthy, with a metallic edge, stamped itself in my memory as the start of survival. The next morning, while I was rinsing glasses, Andrew came down acting different. Freshly ironed shirt, a whiff of expensive cologne. "Good morning, Mother," he said, light as if nothing had happened. I looked at him and stayed quiet. "I'm sorry about yesterday. I lost my temper. Work's stressful. You're still my mother." Before I could answer, he stepped closer, poured me coffee, set it on the table. "You should rest and stop wandering around. Lately I've noticed you're unstable. If you keep pushing about those accounts, I might have to get a doctor to evaluate your mental health. You know how it is, old age, confusion." His tone was gentle, but every word slid over my skin like ice. I understood. One word from me, and he'd label me the crazy old lady. I set the cup down and looked him straight in the eye. "What are you afraid of that you'd hire a doctor just to declare your mother insane?" His eyes darkened, then he pasted on a smile. "I'm not afraid of anything. I'm just trying to protect you." He turned away, voice still mild. "Oh, and remember, 10 a.m. today. We're going to the bank. We'll tidy up the paperwork. No need to drag this out, right?" I nodded. In my head, everything spun. If I refused, he could do anything. If I agreed, I'd lose everything. I had one hope, Ruth. Around 8:45, there was a knock at the back door. I opened it and Ruth stood there, holding a tiny memory card wrapped in foil. Her coat was damp with dew, her breathing quick. "You have to come with me, right now." I can't." "Andrew's upstairs. Listen to me, Margaret. I have video and clear audio. If you don't go today, there might not be a tomorrow." I looked at her, then up the stairs. Water ran in the bathroom. He was still getting ready. I ran to my room, opened the safe, and stuffed the black envelope, house deed, and ID into my purse. "Back door," Ruth said. We slipped through the yard, along the fence, out the narrow alley. I was shaking so badly I had to hold on to Ruth. If he finds out I left, then he'll say you're crazy and, "Next time you won't get a chance to fight back. We need to see Assistant District Attorney Kimberly Hart." I called ahead. We took a cab. The whole way, all I heard was my heartbeat. The sky was gray, misty rain tapping the glass, buildings sliding behind us like silent witnesses. Kimberly Hart's office was in a red brick building downtown. She was in her early 40s, brown hair, upright posture, quick, decisive voice. When Ruth introduced me, she just nodded and said, "Have a seat." "I'm listening." Ruth set the memory card on the desk. "She's being abused." I recorded it. Kimberly loaded the card into her computer. The screen showed a grainy but clear image. Andrew clamping my wrist, his voice harsh. "Tomorrow you'll sign everything away. If not, you know the consequences." You could hear me yell, and Ruth outside calling, "Margaret!" Everything was audible. In the small office, the sound made the air heavy. Kimberly sat still for a few seconds, then turned to me. "Do you have any other documents?" I slid the black envelope to her. "Everything's here, statements, paperwork, and the sworn statement I signed at Northern Apex." Kimberly looked through it and nodded. "You've done exactly the right thing. With this evidence, we can request an emergency arrest. Warrant charges will include elder abuse, coercion, and financial fraud." I could hardly believe it. "Really? I can get out of this?" "Not just get out, but protect your rights. But you need to sign the complaint. After that, the police will move within a few hours." Ruth squeezed my hand. "Do it. For yourself. And for all of us." I looked at the pen on the desk. One signature, but a line between silence and justice. I remembered the years of bowing my head, Andrew's eyes when he said, "You're nothing." I took a breath and picked up the pen. My signature trembled at the first letter, but by the last, my hand was steady as steel. Kimberly nodded, a thin smile on her lips. "Good. You just did the bravest thing in your life." She called the task force. "Prepare to detain Andrew Hill. Address." I heard her firm voice, each sentence nailing reality into place. While the police mobilized, Kimberly said, "You should stay away from your house for a few days. I'll arrange a safe place." I looked at Ruth. "I'm not going anywhere until I see him in cuffs." Kimberly paused, then nodded. "Fair. You have that right." We returned to my neighborhood in an unmarked car. Rain dotted the windshield, each drop a heartbeat in my chest. As we reached the lane, I saw Andrew loading bags into his car. Suit, tie, looking sharp, but his face was tense, eyes darting. A black police cruiser pulled up, lights flashing red and blue. The siren split the quiet street. 2 officers got out. One read aloud, "Andrew Hill, you're under arrest on suspicion of abuse, coercion, and financial fraud. You have the right to remain silent." He turned and froze when he saw me standing a few yards away holding a black umbrella. "Mom," his voice caught. "What are you doing?" I answered softly, oddly calm, "I'm just telling the truth." He thrashed and shouted, "I didn't do anything. She's old. She's delusional." They cuffed him, pushing his head down. I heard the cold metal close click, a small sound louder than any scream I'd ever heard. As the car took him away, I stood still, rain soaking my shoulders. Ruth came up and held the umbrella over me. "You okay, Margaret?" I looked into the fogged window where my reflection stared back, not the trembling woman from last night, but someone else, upright, clear-eyed, free. "I'm okay," I said quietly, "for the first time in years." Kimberly stepped out and squeezed my shoulder. "From here on, the law takes over, but you saved yourself before anyone else could." I lifted my face to the sky. The rain had stopped, without me noticing. Drops clung to the rose canes, glittering in the early afternoon sun. Beneath them, the tiny camera lay hidden under leaves, silent, but it had spoken for me. When the cruiser turned the corner, I stayed there in the after rain, gripping the umbrella handle till my knuckles went white. The siren faded, but inside me the snap of the cuffs kept echoing, cruel and freeing at once. The house was finally quiet after years of shouting. No more smashing, no more stomping, only shards of glass reflecting the face of an old woman who was finally clear-headed. I picked up each shard, hands shaking but strangely calm. When Ruth stepped in, she said nothing, just helped me gather the pieces scattered across the kitchen. "You need rest," she murmured. I nodded, but I couldn't sleep that night. In my head, I still heard Andrew's voice as he was taken away. "You'll regret this. I'm your son." 3 days later, the phone rang. The screen showed a cold line of text, "Inmate call, county jail." I hesitated. Kimberly had warned me, "Don't answer. He'll try to soften you." But part of me felt I needed to hear him, to fully understand the person I'd brought into the world. I picked up. "Mom." Andrew's voice was hoarse, weak. "I don't want to live here. I'm scared. You have to help me." "Help you?" I repeated, voice low. "That's all I've done for 3 years. That's not it. I was set up. They're making things up. I was just trying to protect you from legal trouble." I was silent, then answered softly, "Andrew, you don't need to pretend. Justice isn't something you can manipulate. I'm sorry, Mom. Please don't turn your back on me." I hung up. His voice echoed in my head, but it no longer had the power to soften my heart. A week later, Kimberly called. "The preliminary hearing is set for Thursday morning. Are you ready?" I nodded, though she couldn't see. Inside me was a small storm of fear and anticipation. The courtroom wasn't big, but it was packed. Andrew was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, hair matted, eyes sunken. When he saw me, his lips trembled into a forced smile. I met him with a steady look. Ruth sat beside me, hand on my shoulder in quiet support. The judge, an older woman with a stern face, spoke. "We're here to consider the bail request for the defendant, Andrew Hill." His attorney rose, smooth as ever. "My client is a hard-working man who made mistakes under stress. He's the only caregiver for his elderly mother. We request bail pending trial." Kimberly stood solid as an oak. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Margaret Hill, doesn't need that kind of care. Here are photos of her injuries caused by the defendant, recordings of his threats, and video of the abuse. Additionally, he is under investigation for financial fraud and money laundering. If released, he could destroy evidence." She laid the documents down and played Ruth's recording. Andrew's voice filled the room. "Tomorrow you'll sign everything away. If not, you know the consequences." No one spoke. Even his lawyer faltered. The judge leaned toward him. "Mr. Hill, do you have any explanation for your words?" Andrew stammered. I was just angry. My mother misunderstood." "No, I understood just fine." I cut in, quiet, but firm. "You turned me into a servant and used me to legitimize your crimes. Now you're afraid of losing the freedom you took from me." The room fell silent. Andrew stared at me, the warmth that once lived in his eyes replaced by confusion and fear. The judge brought down the gavel. After reviewing the evidence, the court denies bail. The defendant, Andrew Hill, will be remanded pending trial. Andrew leapt up, shouting, "No, this is all staged. My mother's crazy. She's senile. She just wants revenge." 2 officers held him down. I didn't flinch. I looked straight at him and knew there was nothing left to save. When court adjourned, I sat a moment longer, waiting for the hall to clear. Ruth whispered, "It's done, Margaret. He can't touch you now." I gave a tired smile. "I know, but what he broke lasts longer than bruises trust." We were almost at the door when a familiar voice called behind us, "Mrs. Hill." I turned. Jasmine stood there, hair loose, eyes swollen, coat wrinkled. She walked up, voice shaking. I'm sorry. I don't even know what to say. I've been scared for so long." I looked at her in silence. "He hit me," she blurted. "Many times. Once, right before you heard that bowl shatter. I didn't dare step in, didn't dare call the police. I thought if I endured it, he'd calm down. But the quieter I was, the worse he got." I saw her hands shaking. For a second, I realized the woman in front of me wasn't a proud accomplice anymore, but another victim. "You don't need to apologize," I said. "Fear makes people stay quiet." "I understand that." Tears ran down Jasmine's cheeks, one by one. "He took my money, too. The money my parents gave me to open a shop. He said he'd invest it, then it was gone." Ruth cut in, firm. If you're ready, tell everything to Kimberly. You can help bring him fully into the light." Jasmine nodded hard. "I will. I've been silent too long." I looked at her, hurting and relieved at once. "You're not just saving me, Jasmine. You're saving yourself." Kimberly walked up with a file in hand. "I heard. Thank you for coming. If you're willing to testify, this case will move forward in a big way." Jasmine gave a small, tearful smile. "I won't let him destroy anyone else." She turned to me and gently took my hand. "Thank you for not staying silent, Mrs. Hill. If you hadn't, I'd still be trapped in that house." I squeezed her hand and answered, my voice tight, "No one deserves to be called a victim." "Forever, Jasmine. We can all stand up, it just takes someone to go first." That afternoon, back at Ruth's house, I sat by the window. Late sunlight fell across the teacup on the table, casting a thin halo. Outside, Ruth's roses were still blooming, and the tiny camera lay quiet at the base, silent, steady, a witness that couldn't lie. Ruth set a hand on my shoulder and asked softly, "How are you feeling?" I smiled. "Lighter, not because he was arrested, because I'm not alone anymore." She nodded. "That's the real freedom." I looked toward the end of the street where the police car had driven past. Peace spread through me, the kind I thought I'd lost for good. 3 weeks after the hearing, when things seemed to have calmed down, I got an envelope from the Franklin County Jail. A yellow envelope, stamped censored, with a slanted handwriting I knew at once Andrew's. I was going to stick it in a drawer unopened, but my hand slid along the seal and tore it anyway. Inside were 2 neatly folded pages. His handwriting was still sharp and cold like a blade. "Mother, I know you're enjoying your new role, the brave woman, the celebrated survivor. But don't forget, I have documents from Hanover v. State in 2008 where you edited a witness file. If I send copies to the court, your guardian of justice image will pop like a soap bubble. Remember who told you to optimize the documents to avoid problems for the client? I still have that email with your e-signature. If you drop the charges, everything stays quiet. I'm giving you one chance." I let the letter fall. It felt like someone poured ice water down my back. Hanover versus State. That name stabbed through my memory. 15 years ago, I was still at Benton and Avery LLP. I was executive secretary to Richard Hale, then a senior partner, not yet the CEO of Northern Apex. He called me into his office that day and set a thick stack of files in front of me. "Margaret," he said, "we need to optimize this set a bit, cut some clutter, clean up wording so it's less harmful to the client." I remember asking, "Do you mean format or content?" He just smiled. "Format, of course." I didn't overthink it and did exactly as told. But a few weeks later, when the case ended, the press was loud about altered evidence, a big ethics flap. I was scared, but no one mentioned my name. The secret got buried with the years. Until today, when Andrew dug it up like an old grave. I sat for hours, staring at the letter. Wind pushed through the window and sent a few bills skittering across the table. My heart pounded. Suddenly light and sound felt far away. That afternoon, I brought the letter to Kimberly Hart's office. She finished reading, her face set. "He's blackmailing you," she said, each word clear. "I know. What scares me more is, he might be telling the truth." Kimberly took off her glasses and looked closely at me. "Did you actually alter documents in that case?" I cut a few sentences and swapped a few words. I didn't understand the law fully back then. I just did what my boss asked. She leaned back, thinking. "Legally, if we show you didn't knowingly do wrong, the risk to you is very small. But if he has materials and drops them at the right moment, the media will dig. They don't care who's at fault, they just want a story." I pressed a hand to my forehead, dizzy. I've already lost my standing in my own family. I can't bear being paraded in front of the world again. Kimberly spoke gently. "No one wants exposure, but if he holds something over you, You'll always be a hostage." That night, I told Ruth. She frowned slightly as she listened. "Hiding a secret is a victim's chain," she said. "I lived with a husband like that, always threatening to spill my secrets. I only got free when I said them first. I'm not as strong as you think, Ruth. I'm terrified." "No, you're just remembering what captivity felt like. You're forgetting you have light now, and the truth. And Kimberly." She stood to pour more tea. Steam rose, mint filled the kitchen, warm in a way that surprised me. I sat and felt my heartbeat slow. 2 days later, I got a second letter. Again from Franklin County Jail, this time with a photo. It was a shot of the handwritten note I made in 2008 while reworking the Hanover v. State report. My messy line, "Cut the witness section. Boss says it's unnecessary." Below it, Andrew had scribbled, "Remember your own handwriting? If you don't drop the charges, this photo goes to the media." There's also the Christmas bonus clip from that year. "People will think you helped launder money for the firm. I don't want to do this, but you're forcing me." The dizziness rushed back. I grabbed the table to steady myself. My mind reeled like someone yanked me back 15 years to a late-lit office, me at the keyboard, thinking I was just doing my job. The next morning, I brought everything to Kimberly. She looked at the photo and said, "He's smarter than I thought. He's tying 2 cases together, your old one and his current one, to distract and create doubt about your honesty. If the media bites, they'll assume you lied before, even if it's unrelated." What should I do? "Did you ever receive cash or gifts you didn't report while at Benton and Avery?" I hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Yes, a few times. Small things. I thought they were holiday thank yous. I didn't think it broke the rules." Kimberly exhaled. "Then, there's a small risk, but not big. I need you to be completely honest so I can protect you properly." I told her everything. A $200 Christmas envelope, a gift card from a client. Kimberly wrote it down and did a quick mental tally. At worst, if anyone digs, you could face a minor administrative penalty. No one's prosecuting that after so many years. The only real danger is your silence, because he's using it to scare you. She paused and looked straight at me. "Do you understand, Margaret? Every time you fear being exposed, he gains power. If you say it first, he has nothing left to threaten you with." I looked out the window at the light rain. Drops slid down the glass like the years I'd locked myself in fear. I asked, voice tight, "Say everything publicly? Can I live through that?" "You don't have to endure," Kimberly said softly. "You just have to be free." That night, Ruth brought over a fresh almond loaf. We ate in silence. When she stood to clear the plates, I asked, "If you were me, would you go public?" She thought a moment, then said, "I would, because if you don't, people will keep believing your fear is real. When you speak, they finally see how strong you are." She smiled and poured more tea. "The only thing that keeps people trapped isn't offense, Margaret. It's a secret." I looked into my cup, the steam hazy. In that soft blur, I saw Andrew's face as a boy, mischievous and trusting. Then I saw him now bitter, scheming, full of resentment. I knew if I stayed silent, he'd keep that chain around my neck. I drew a long breath and whispered, almost under my breath but sure, "Okay, Ruth, I'll tell everything." Her eyes lit. "That's the Margaret Hill I know." That night, I sat at the table with a blank sheet of paper. Warm light fell across the deep lines on my hands. I started to write, each word a little shaky. I, Margaret Hill, once inadvertently took part in editing documents in the Hanover versus State case under a supervisor's direction. I did not realize then that it could be considered improper. I never accepted money or benefits in exchange for that action. I choose to make this public not to justify myself, but to end all threats. When I signed my name, I felt weight to lift. It wasn't quite courage, it was freedom. I folded the page and set it beside Andrew's letter. Two worlds side by side, a secret for blackmail and a truth for release. And I knew, when morning came, I would take it to Kimberly. There was nothing left to fear. The next morning, I brought the statement to Kimberly's office. The sky was heavy, wind pushed hard down the avenue, sirens drifting far off. Each breath felt like lead. In my purse, the paper from last night rustled, reminding me this was a decision I couldn't undo. Kimberly read every line, her face unchanged until the end. After a few seconds of silence, she set it down and spoke slowly. "Do you know what this means, Margaret?" "I do. I'm incriminating myself." "Not exactly," she softened. "You're taking away his weapon. When a blackmailer has nothing to hold, his power evaporates." I sat still, fingers laced tight. Kimberly went on. "I have a proposal. We hold a press conference. You disclose this yourself. What happened in the past, that small violation. You tell your story, own it, and end it on your terms. Then Andrew can't control you anymore." Her voice was firm, but my chest clenched. I pictured a wall of lenses, flashing lights, headlines built to sting. Mother accuses son of abuse, once tied to old scandal. "You want me to put it all out there?" Kimberly nodded. "Only light makes darkness vanish. The more you hide, the stronger he gets." I was quiet a long time. In my head, I heard familiar sounds, the shattering soup bowl from that night. Andrew yelling, "If you weren't my mother, you'd be sleeping on the street." Back then, I chose silence. And it almost cost me my life. I looked up, voice shaking but sure. I'd rather be judged in public than controlled in the dark. Kimberly smiled slightly. "I knew you'd say that." The press conference was set in a small hall at the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office, with local media and a few big outlets. When I walked in, camera lights hit my face so hard I had to squint. Ruth sat in the front row, clutching a handkerchief. Kimberly stood by the podium, calmly introducing, "Mrs. Margaret Hill will share her story, a mother, a survivor of abuse and financial exploitation, and a citizen willing to face her past." She gestured for me to step up. All eyes turned to me. For a moment I wanted to turn back, to hide in my small kitchen again, but I thought, if I retreat now, he wins again. I stepped up, adjusted the mic, and began. "For 3 years I lived in fear. I was afraid of my own son, afraid of the contempt in the house I bought with 40 years of work. I once believed a mother's love could fix everything, but you cannot fix someone who treats love like a tool for control." I drew a breath and looked at the line of cameras. My son, Andrew Hill, abused me physically and emotionally. He controlled my finances, forged my signature, and used my name to launder money. I was so afraid I stopped speaking, to the point I forgot who I was. I'm not telling this for sympathy. I'm telling it because silence never saves anyone. The room was so quiet you could hear pens scratch. I continued, "I also need to admit that 15 years ago, I made a mistake. In a case at my former firm, I edited documents without realizing it was against policy. I didn't do it for money or favors, but because I naively trusted my superior. I'm saying this today so my son can't turn it into a weapon against his mother. I accept responsibility in public, not because anyone forced me, but because I choose to be honest." A reporter stood. "Are you worried about being charged after this admission?" I answered softly, "If I have to pay for an old mistake to be free from fear, I'm willing. Freedom isn't free." Kimberly stepped up and signaled me to pause. She looked around the room. "Mrs. Hill's story shows the strength of Lug. Truth. Our office confirms, after reviewing the records, she will not face criminal charges. We will focus on prosecuting Andrew Hill, who exploited his mother and tried to blackmail her." Murmurs spread. A middle-aged female reporter raised her hand. "Mrs. Hill, what would you say to those being abused or controlled right now?" I looked straight at the lens where I imagined hundreds of women sitting at kitchen tables, in nursing homes, in quiet houses. "I'd say this," I answered. "Don't let fear keep you a prisoner, whether it's your child, your spouse, or anyone. If they make you tremble every day, that isn't family. Believe in justice. It may be slow, but it doesn't go dark." Applause rolled through the room, not loud, but low, long, and sincere. In the front row, Ruth lifted a hand to wipe her eyes. When it wrapped, Kimberly came to me, voice full. "You did what many never dare, Margaret. He can't touch you now." I exhaled, my legs close to buckling. I just said what I should have said long ago. "Sometimes," she said, "courage isn't shouting. It's telling the truth in a steady voice." Outside the hall, reporters waited for more quotes. I smiled lightly and declined. I'd said enough, and for the first time, I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. That evening, Ruth and I sat on her porch. The sun slid behind the trees, painting the yard red. She handed me ginger tea, warmth spreading through me. "I saw the coverage," Ruth said. "Every outlet is praising you. One headline called you the mother who cut the blackmail chain." I gave a small laugh. "Sounds like a movie. Movies only copy real life, Margaret. Real life just hurts more." I leaned back and watched the roses tremble in the breeze. "Ruth, I thought I'd lost everything, my good name, my child. Trust. Turns out, when you lose everything, you find yourself." She nodded gently. "You got back the most important thing, your voice." Kimberly stopped by after dark with a folder. "Good news, the DA's office officially won't charge you. We're shifting all focus to Andrew." I took her hand, my voice catching. "Thank you, Kimberly. Without you, I'd still be shaking in my own house." "No," she smiled. "You just needed someone to remind you that you deserve to live without bowing your head." That night I slept in Ruth's living room. Moonlight slipped through the curtains and fell across my hands, hands that once trembled, signing endless forms, bore bruises, and shook with fear. Now they were still. I hugged the pillow, listened to the wind at the window, and felt something strange settle in. Real peace. No more nightmares, no more shouting. Just me, the moon, and the quiet softness of freedom. For the first time in years, I slept well. 3 weeks after the press conference, when the buzz had faded and "The Mother Who Spoke the Truth" headlines had been replaced by newer stories, I got an unexpected call. On the line was Owen Price, calm and courteous as ever. "Mrs. Hill, Mr. Richard Hale, CEO of Northern Apex, would like to meet you. He says this isn't just business." That name made my heart skip. Richard Hale, the boss who once said, "Just tweak a few sections in the Hanover v. State days." The man whose one sentence left me haunted for 15 years. I was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "Okay. Tell him I'll come." The next afternoon, I stood before Northern Apex's soaring glass tower, the same place that once made me shake just to walk in and clear my name. This time I came back not as someone under scrutiny, but as someone who had weathered a storm. Richard met me in the lobby, still as polished as ever, salt and pepper hair, crisp white shirt, navy tie. The difference was the smile, no arrogance, only contrition. "Margaret," he said, voice low, "I owe you an apology." I looked at him evenly. "For what?" "Richard, for telling me to optimize documents 15 years ago, or for not seeing my son committing crimes under your roof?" He lowered his head slightly, voice softer. "Both." We sat in a 20th floor conference room. Late light poured through the glass, laying pale gold across the table. Richard set a folder in front of me. "The internal investigation shows Andrew embezzled more than $130,000 over 2 years. Besides using your account, he sold confidential information to competitors for cash." I should have caught it sooner. I went still. Every number in the file was a fresh cut. I asked, oddly calm, "What do you plan to do now?" Richard laced his fingers. The company is pursuing criminal and civil action against Andrew Hill. But I also want to make amends for you and for this company. He looked at me, steady. We'd like to bring you back, not as a secretary, but as an in-house ethics and compliance advisor. Starting salary, $4,000 a month. Additionally, the board has approved $50,000 in compensation for the indirect harm caused by Andrew's actions. Everything's been cleared. I stared. Are you serious? Serious. I'm not doing charity, Margaret. I need someone who understands how thin the line is between right and wrong and will never step over it again. You're that person. I looked out the window and saw the city blazing with sunlight. 3 years of abuse, a lifetime of steady work, and now here I was again, sitting before a door I once thought had slammed shut forever. I said softly, "You know, Richard, there was a time I thought I'd never walk into this building again. But if you believe in me, I'll try not to start over, but to end things the right way." He smiled, relieved. Welcome back, Margaret Hill. In the days that followed, I went back to work every morning in my old white blouse, a pearl pin at the collar, and a new fast leather notebook under my arm. The smell of coffee in the lobby, the click of shoes on stone floors, everything reminded me of the years I'd lost. But this time, I wasn't anyone's paper runner. I sat in a small advisory office with Owen Price, reviewing the company's financial controls and auditing spending approvals. Owen looked over and smiled. "How does it feel to be back, Mrs. Hill?" I took a sip of tea. "Like cleaning up an old house after the roof caved in, only this time I brought new bricks." He laughed. "I'm keeping that line. We worked non-stop." I found a few more red flags in the archive's internal expense entries that lined up with transactions Andrew had made. Owen took careful notes and said Andrew might not have acted alone. A few days later, Jasmine walked into the office with a small black hard drive in her arms. "I found this in the old garage," she said. He hid it behind a panel. "I think it's company related." I took it from her. "You sure you want to be part of this?" Jasmine pressed her lips together. "I've hidden long enough, I want to end it." Owen checked the drive and went pale. Inside were lists of files Andrew sold to a competitor, plus the emails between them. The evidence was enough to at least double his sentence. When Kimberly received the data, she called me that night. "You just changed the entire case. With this, Andrew won't just be convicted for money laundering, he's facing corporate betrayal charges too. You won." I was quiet for a moment, then said, "No, Kimberly. I've only just started again." A month later, at an internal company gathering, Richard stood at the podium in front of the staff. I sat in the front row with Owen and Jasmine. "We've been through a hard season," he said. "But out of the wreckage we learned the most important thing. Transparency is the foundation of trust. And the one who reminded me of that is Mrs. Margaret Hill." The room applauded. I bowed my head, warmed and a little embarrassed. Richard continued, "The company is creating a fund for victims of financial abuse called the Hill Foundation to honor the courage of a woman who turned pain into action." I couldn't hold back tears. Never in my life did I imagine my name would stand for anything good. Now it wasn't a mark of shame, but a symbol of standing up. After the ceremony, Owen clapped my shoulder. "How do you feel?" I smiled. Strange. 3 months ago, I was afraid to open my front door. Now I've been handed the keys to a new beginning. Jasmine came over and gently took my hand. "I signed up to volunteer with the Hill Foundation. I want to help women who were like us." I squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Jasmine. Sometimes a new door opens only when we dare to step out of the old house, even if it once meant everything." That afternoon, when I left the Northern Apex building, the sky was honey gold. I paused on the steps and took a deep breath. People hurried past, car horns, clicking heels, all of it blended into a living song I thought I'd never hear again. I smiled. No more trembling, no more bowed head. Ahead of me, The future stood open, like a bright doorway where the ruins had finally closed behind me. After the Hill Foundation announcement, my life settled into a new rhythm. But when the lights dimmed and the applause faded, I realized there was still a wound unhealed, not on my skin, but in my mind. Kimberly was the first to notice. "You've lived in fear too long, Margaret. Your body learned how to protect itself, but your mind hasn't. I think you should see a PTSD specialist." I hesitated, then agreed. In the first session, the doctor asked, "Do you often dream about old memories?" I nodded. "Every time I hear a bowl hit the table, I see his face, Andrew's. I wake up with my heart racing and my hands shaking." He took notes, voice soft as breath. "You lived too long. Under control. Now you need to learn to take back control of yourself." The session lasted more than 2 hours. I learned to breathe through panic and to stop apologizing for things that weren't my fault. Each exercise seemed simple: stand tall, look in the mirror, say, "I'm safe," but each one brought me to tears. I never thought I'd have to relearn the most basic thing: feeling at home in my own body. Ruth walked this road with me, patient as ever. She took me to a survivors group at the Franklin Community Center. In a small room with warm yellow lights, a dozen women sat in a circle with teacups in their hands, each carrying a different wound and the same look of someone who'd been choked by fear. When it was my turn, I stumbled over my words. My voice trembled as I began. "I'm Margaret Hill. I was abused by my son." I stayed silent for 3 years because I thought I deserved it. No one spoke, but a few nodded. A brown-skinned woman named Carla took my hand. "We get it. I used to think I was the worst person for not leaving sooner, but surviving is the first victory." The room broke into gentle applause, just enough for me to feel I wasn't alone. For the first time in years, I told it all about the soup bowl, the slaps, being stripped of my rights inside my own home. When I finished, my shoulders felt lighter, like I'd dropped an old stone that had clung to me from the past. In the mornings after that, I started putting my house back together. The wreckage from the police raid still lingered: stained walls, a cabinet with a long crack. Neighbors offered to repaint, but I declined. I wanted to keep a few fissures as proof of survival. I changed the curtains and set a white orchid on the sill. Each morning, when sunlight cut through the frame, my heart calmed. The house that once trapped me became the place I learned to live again. Kimberly still stopped by often. We spent many evenings practicing my testimony. "You'll need to stay calm when they try to provoke you," she said. "The defense will look for contradictions or question your memory." I gave a thin smile. "I lived 3 years with a man who called me senile. No one's shaking me now." Kimberly laughed. "That's exactly the energy I want." Each practice run, she played defense counsel and pressed hard. "Do you have proof Andrew hit you?" "Yes. Video and photos my neighbor recorded." "Do you admit you signed some papers that helped Andrew?" "I signed under duress. The proof is in messages and recordings in the black envelope." Kimberly nodded, satisfied. "Good. Calm, clear, no defensiveness. Let the truth speak." I rehearsed dozens of times in front of the mirror, down to the smallest detail. Each time I spoke, my voice steadied. My eyes stopped looking away. I was learning to stand tall with words. Meanwhile, Owen sent me the final financial report, more than 200 pages, proving Andrew stole company funds through 17 transactions and laundered them under my name. He set the binder on the table. "With these numbers, he has no way out." I nodded and thanked him. "Mr. Owen," I said, "thank you for believing me from the start." He smiled. "I just did the right thing. You're the one who walked out of the dark." At the same time, Richard emailed to confirm he had reimbursed every dollar Andrew took from my accounts, including interest. He wrote, "You taught me a lesson about honesty that 4 decades in this industry couldn't. I hope this money is just the beginning of a new life." I finished reading with tears I couldn't explain. Maybe because, for the first time in years, Someone called me by my full name, Mrs. Margaret Hill, without the word victim trailing behind it. On a quiet weekend afternoon, I took the old black envelope from my drawer. It had followed me through everything from the night of the slap to the day of the press conference. Now that the truth was out, it wasn't a weight anymore, just a relic from a time that was dead. I carried it to the backyard. Ruth stood beside me, silent. I lit a match. Flames rose and licked the papers, erased the forged signatures and tiny commas that once terrified me. As the ash lifted into the breeze, I felt clean. "How do you feel?" Ruth asked. I watched the thin smoke, like waking up from a nightmare and realizing I'm still alive. The night before the trial, my phone rang. The caller ID froze my breath. Franklin Correctional Facility. I hesitated a second, then answered. Andrew's voice came through, rough and tired. "Mom, it's me." I said nothing. "Mom, I know I was wrong. I don't want to go to prison. I just want you to forgive me, just once." I closed my eyes. For a moment I saw a 10-year-old boy, arms around my neck, begging forgiveness for breaking a vase. But the man's voice on the line pulled me back. "You made me afraid in my own home, Andrew. Now you're the one who's scared?" "I lost everything, Mom. You're all I have." I gripped the phone, strangely calm. "No, Andrew, you still have justice, and justice has to come before family." Silence. I heard his ragged breathing, then the click of the line. I set the phone down. In the mirror, the woman looking back wasn't trembling. I opened a drawer and took out the old lipstick coral red, the one Andrew mocked. "At your age, why bother?" I twisted it up and drew a thin line across my lips. Small, clean, a sign of strength, a reminder that I am still myself, no matter how often life tried to erase me. I smiled at my reflection. Tomorrow I would walk into court not just as a witness but as a survivor, a free woman. That morning the sky was gray and low with rain. I stepped from the car in front of the Franklin courthouse. Black shoes, newly polished, an old leather bag in my hand with my testimony, the coral lipstick, and a small slip of paper. "Stand tall, Margaret." Ruth had pressed it into my palm last night like a charm. Ahead, cold stone steps rose to a heavy wooden door. Reporters clustered on both sides, shutters clicking. I heard Kimberly call, "Mrs. Hill, over here." She wore a navy suit, eyes bright and steady. "You okay?" "I am," I smiled. "It's time to end this." The courtroom was big, high-ceilinged, and bright with white lights. Paper, wood, and worry mingled in the air. I sat in the front row beside Kimberly. Across the aisle, Andrew was cuffed in a gray jail uniform, hair messy, beard patchy. I barely recognized the son who once kissed my forehead every morning. The prosecutor read the charges clearly from the board. Domestic abuse, financial embezzlement, extortion, witness intimidation. Each word landed like a hammer. I didn't shake. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, listening as my past was read aloud, not to shame me this time, but to find justice. Jasmine testified first. Small frame, hair pulled back, hands clenched. Her voice wavered at first, but steadied as she spoke. "I lived with him for 2 years. In that time, he hit me, took my money, and threatened me if I told anyone. I used to think his mother was the only person he respected. Then I learned he respects no one." The room was silent. Andrew wouldn't look at her. When she read the threatening messages he sent, a few jurors lowered their eyes. As she stepped down, her eyes found mine. There was no hate there, only tired compassion. I nodded. She nodded back, as if we had both come through the same storm. Next was Owen. He took the stand with a thick stack of documents and walked the court through a systematic pattern of fraud. The defendant, Andrew Hill, used his position in finance to move company funds into accounts under his mother's name, Mrs. Margaret Hill, who had no knowledge of it. The total is $132,400, over 17 transfers with verified evidence of forged signatures. Owen put each statement on the screen, every bank page, every mismatch. His voice was even and sure. When he finished, he glanced my way, as if to say, "We did it." The defense tried to push back, claiming Andrew just asked his mom to move money as a favor. Owen answered cleanly, "No one needs a favor 70 times across 3 different states over 2 years." A small chuckle rippled through the room. Andrew bowed his head, jaw tight. Then it was my turn. Kimberly touched my arm and whispered, "You're ready." I stood and walked to the stand. My footsteps sounded on the floor like a calm heartbeat. When I looked up, dozens of eyes were on me, jurors, press, the prosecutor, and Andrew. I began in a voice so steady it surprised me. "I'm Margaret Hill, 68. I'm the defendant's mother." Silence. I faced the judge and told it all, each piece, each memory I'd once tried to bury. From small insults, Andrew turned me into a live-in maid in my own house. Every month, my retirement check disappeared. Every time I asked, he said, "I'm just managing it for you." I stayed because I thought a mother's love might save a person. But the night he threw a bowl of soup in my face, I understood that if I didn't fight back, I would die a little every day. I told them about Owen, the 18th floor, the forgeries, the crushing grip on my wrist, and the final blackmail letter. I explained how I confessed my old mistake in public to sever his power over me. Each sentence felt like a cut, but one that freed me, not hurt me. The defense rose to cross-examine. "Mrs. Hill," he said, "you admit mistakes in the Hanover v. State matter, correct? How can we trust the memory of a 68-year-old? A murmur rose. I took a breath. I can forget dates. I will never forget what it felt like when my son's hand was on my throat. If you need help with your memory, the video my neighbor recorded will jog it." Kimberly smiled and signaled. Ruth stepped forward and submitted the memory card. The footage filled the screen, Andrew shouting, forcing me to sign, his voice clear. "If you don't sign, you lose everything." No one made a sound. Even the judge gripped his armrest. When the video ended, Kimberly turned to the defense and said softly, "Any more questions about my client's memory?" He said nothing and sat down. The room thickened with quiet. Andrew's head hung, his shoulders sagged. I saw the collapse, not loud or dramatic, just an absolute emptiness when a man loses the power he thought he'd keep forever. The jury conferred briefly. Then one juror stood to read the verdict. "We find the defendant, Andrew Hill, guilty on all counts." The judge nodded, voice firm. "The defendant is sentenced to 18 years in prison and must pay full restitution." The gavel struck 3 times, echoing. I closed my eyes and let the sound etch itself into me, a period at the end of 3 years of hell. Andrew looked up at me. His eyes were hollow, no hatred, just the pit of late understanding. I didn't speak. I gave a small nod, not forgiveness, goodbye. As I left the courtroom, Kimberly took my hand. "You did it." I smiled, hoarse. "No, we did." Outside, the noon sun hit the courthouse steps. I stood still and filled my lungs with warm air. A breeze lifted a few gray hairs and carried the scent of freedom, the smell I'd forgotten. Farther down, Ruth and Jasmine waited, each holding a small flower. When I reached them, they said nothing, just hugged me tight. For the first time in years, I truly stood tall. Not a mother begging for mercy, but a woman who saved herself from a twisted version of family. On the drive home, I rolled down the window and let the wind wash over my face. I watched the trees and houses go by and told myself, the world is still beautiful. I just spent too long afraid to look at it. And now I can. The next spring, when the maples by my porch began to bud, I officially started my new job at Northern Apex as an ethics and compliance advisor. My office was small, a desk, a bookcase, a window on the park. But every morning, When I powered up my computer and steeped mint tea, it felt like a miracle. I was still here, and I got to begin again. I moved slower, breathed deeper, laughed more. The scars in my mind didn't vanish, but they stopped running me. I used my freedom like air, light, natural, without guilt for being happy. I remodeled the old house not to erase the past, but to let the light in. I opened the curtains each morning so sun poured through the living room and glinted off the photo of me and Ruth at the Hill Foundation launch. The walls were a warm cream now, but I left a few small cracks, like time scars, not pretty but honest. Ruth is almost the only family I have left. She shows up in the mornings with a basket of warm pastries and an easy laugh. We plant flowers on the porch and talk about ex-husbands, our kids, and the small things that make two 68-year-old women feel at peace. One afternoon, Ruth asked, "Are you still angry at your son?" I smiled, looking out at the roses. I don't know if it's anger anymore. Maybe regret for the child I once believed would be good. But angry? No, I just won't let him hurt me ever again. I wrote a long letter to Benton and Avery, the firm where I worked for 40 years. I didn't accuse anyone. I urged them to strengthen ethical processes and to require an independent audit each year so the line between what's legal and what's convenient can't blur. A week later, the new managing partner called to thank me and offered an honorary advisor role. I declined. I don't need a title, I just need to know the mistakes I made won't repeat. From the Hill Foundation's early success, Kimberly, Owen, and I launched a small project called Light After Silence, a fund supporting older women abused or financially coerced. We host workshops, offer free legal consults, and raise money for shelters. Every time a hesitant woman walks through our door, I see myself from 3 years ago, hair unkempt, dark circles, hands shaking around an envelope of papers. But when they leave with a faint smile, I know light is spreading slowly, but it holds. In July, Kimberly asked me to speak at the National Conference on Domestic Violence and Elder Financial Abuse. Standing before a big hall and hundreds of silent faces, I wasn't afraid. I began with a simple line: "Secrets only have power when we let them live in the dark." I told my story not for praise, but so someone trembling out there would know they aren't alone. When I finished, the room stood and applauded, and in the crowd I saw dozens of wet eyes. I bowed. Not a victim, not the wounded, a survivor. One late night while I was making tea, the phone rang. The screen read, "Franklin Correctional Facility." My heart pinched, but I picked up. Andrew's voice was low and rough. "Mom, I just want to ask, will you ever forgive me?" I said nothing. He breathed hard, then added, "I don't expect to get out early. I just want to know if you still see me as your son." I drew a long breath. "Andrew," I said slowly, "I don't know when you'll understand this, but forgiveness isn't erasing. When you learn to apologize to yourself, when you truly understand what you did, maybe then I can forgive." Silence. Then he whispered, "I understand." I answered gently, "I hope one day you really will." The call ended, and it felt like a chapter closed, not with hatred, but with the peace of someone who no longer needs to strike back. That night I sat at my desk and opened my old leather journal. Outside, the moon slid across the window frame and drew a pale line on the page. I wrote the final sentence. I won not against my son, but against fear. I shut the book, switched off the light, and sat quietly in the soft dark where a strand of brightness still slipped through the curtain and lay across my face. Not dazzling, not harsh, just enough for me to see that I was smiling. Thank you for staying with me to the very end of my story. If you're reading this, maybe you know what it is to be afraid, alone, or hurt by those you love. I hope my story can be a small lamp to remind you there's a way back, and you can live free, strong, and at peace. Where are you watching from in this big world? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts about the power of truth, about the times you stood up when everything seemed to collapse. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so we can keep listening to more courageous journeys together. Because sometimes a single comment, a single share from you can be the small light that helps someone else find their way out of the dark.